Welcome everyone to our Leadership Academy project series. It is lovely to have you all joining us today. My name is Sarah Adams, and I am one of the graduate students assisting the American Indian and Alaska Native Leadership Academy. Today we are hosting the 6th session of the Leadership Academy project series. Next slide, please. The American Indian and Alaska Native Leadership Academy is a one-year program for behavioral health professionals and Native communities. It is a mentor-mentee program focusing on peer connection, networking, and developing leadership skills. The program includes virtual and in-person training, and each mentee works on their own community-based initiative throughout the program. During this series, mentees from Leadership Academy 3 and 4 present their work to you. They discuss their on-the-ground initiatives to improve important aspects of American Indian and Alaska Native well-being. The series addresses different aspects of community health and describes projects that have impacted people across the country. Next slide, please. This session is presented to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native PTTC and ATTC, located at the University of Iowa. As you can see from this slide, we are part of a national network of technology transfer centers. Next slide, please. This program is funded by SAMHSA, but the content and opinions expressed today do not necessarily reflect the views and policies of our funder. Next slide, please. We are currently on the 6th session of this series. Today, we will hear from Monica Super and learn more about the Modoc Ancestral Run. This is the last session before our summer break. However, we do plan to resume this series in late August. Please keep an eye on your email as we will send out announcements for future sessions. Next slide, please. Here are a few housekeeping things to address before we start. After the event today, you will receive a follow-up email with a link to this session's recording. Within that email, you will also receive instructions on how to receive a certificate of attendance. At the end of today's presentation, please take a few moments to give us feedback on the event. We will share a link to the evaluation in the chat towards the end of the session. We are so thankful for your attendance today. I also want to extend my gratitude to Monica Dreyer-Rossi, our program director. Thank you to Taylor Magnuson, the other graduate student working on this project and assisting today. Lastly, thank you to our center director, Dr. Ann-Helene Skinstad. Next slide, please. Now, I will give you a moment to read our center's land acknowledgement, authored by Ellie Driscoll, Keely Driscoll, and Sean A. Bear. Thank you. Next slide, please. Throughout today's session, you are encouraged to post comments in the chat. If you have questions, we will have a question and answer session after the presentation. Today, I am very excited to introduce our presenter, Monica Super. Monica is a certified prevention specialist and substance abuse counselor. She graduated from the Leadership Academy Cohort 3 in 2021. So, Monica, I am very much looking forward to hearing more about your project. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Monica Super, and I'm calling in from my own homelands in Klamath Falls, Oregon. That's very near the California border. It's a beautiful morning here this morning. It's very chilly, which is kind of odd. Yesterday I was in Redding, California, and it was like 85 degrees. So this morning it's cloudy, cold, and rainy. And the road cam showed there was some snow on 140 this morning. So that's really interesting. But I'm excited to be here today, really talking about actualizing vision through spirit-led leadership. This is a project that was driven for a couple of years through the American Indian Alaska Native Leadership Academy. So I'm really excited to make those connections with this work. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into my slides. So Waklisi, that's our greeting in the Klamath Modoc language. My name is Monica Super. For years, my name was Monica Yellowowl, so some on this call may remember me as that. I am enrolled in the Pit River Nation that is in Northern California with the cornerstones of Mount Lassen, Mount Shasta, Goose Lake, and Eagle Lake. And I'm also a descendant of the Klamath tribe. So I have beautiful country that I come from. I was born and raised in my mother's country. I have lived in Klamath Falls, Oregon, nearly my entire life. I love where I live. I have a very robust life experience that includes everything from, dealing with alcohol, domestic violence, abuse survivor, to coming into the behavioral health field and just having this very rich work experience for the last 18 years. Like it was stated previously, I was a graduate of the American Indian Alaska Native Leadership Academy in 2021. We were a really fortunate group that got an extra year tacked on to our time together because of COVID. And then also this morning, I had a message that today actually marks the anniversary of the day that I learned I was accepted into the Leadership Academy. So that was really an awesome connection today. And I'll talk about this a little bit as we go on about just watching for the signs. Looking for the signs that you are on the right path. That's it. That's a really big part of spirit-led leadership, is just that you are aware. You have this higher level of awareness, and you're watching for signs and connections to really solidify that you're on the right road, that you're going in the right direction. So that was a beautiful sign that I got this morning, because here I am today, and that wasn't by design. It actually was by the Creator's will. So I'm really excited for that today. So we'll be meeting together today until the 12 o'clock hour. I really love to present in a storytelling fashion. So this isn't going to be, like talking about a clinical model. This is going to be talking about experience and how I've traveled through the world in the last few years, and how a chunk of that time was really had an impression through the American Indian Leadership Academy and my awesome mentor, and where we took this work of the Modoc Ancestral Run and really elevated it over the series of the last few years. And so I'll be sharing a lot about this just through a storytelling process. Oh, I do have a purpose with being here in this virtual space today with all of you amazing folks who are working in your own communities. So my purpose on this call is to really help you connect leadership as inherent duty. And this is really looking at leadership through an indigenous lens, but leadership as inherent duty. I also want to always connect in right time, right place, right people. That's my mantra. I live and die by that statement. But I think it is so important to see the world through that lens. I'm going to talk about how do we recognize the signs that we're on the right path, and that'll be very evident throughout today's time together. And then I'll really be highlighting on the Modoc Ancestral Run. So this year will mark the 14th Modoc Ancestral Run that's been happening. So we've had some time in delivering this ceremony for the community, and really paying close attention to it, and building on it every year. So that's my purpose with you folks today, is to focus in those 4 areas in the presentation. I want to start out by talking and framing what I call inherent leadership. And in my initial introduction, I talked about being from the Pitt River Nation of Northern California. So my late father, Glenn Wilson, is enrolled in the Pitt River tribe. And when my siblings and I were born, him and my mom had a conversation and decided that we also would be members of the Pitt River tribe. And so I come from 2 bands of Pitt River people. I come from the Hamawi band of Pitt Rivers and the Otstagewi band of Pitt Rivers. And those are folks who have lived in the Modoc County area and along Mount Lassen and Hat Creek. And so 2 really strong bands of Pitt River Indians. My mom is a descendant of the Klamath and Modoc people. And so when I mean inherent duty, I mean taking our story all the way back to the very beginning. And for Pitt River people, it was the silver fox and the coyote. So Quan and Jamal were responsible for creating the world of the Pitt River people. And they were both creators and leaders in their own sense. But Silver Fox, he was a very wise individual, and he had a lot of really beautiful visions that he could bring to life and make things really happen. Those were his natural talents. And so I descend from what Silver Fox and Coyote had created. I descend from their leadership. The leadership qualities I have can be traced all the way back to their wanderings and their creations and their dealings. When I look at my mom's people, the Klamath and Modoc people, I hail from Kamush and Morningstar. And so this is the creator and his daughter. And his daughter had these really amazing leadership qualities. She's a very assertive person or spirit, and called Kamush and told him that it was time to create the world of the people. And so she also had these leadership qualities about her. And so when I trace my mom's people all the way back to the beginning of time, I trace them back to Kamush and Morningstar and that inherent leadership. This is a picture of my 6th great grandmother. Her name was Matilda Whittle. And my family only goes back about 6 generations on paper. Before that, we were living in a very traditional world pre-contact, and a lot of that information is just in our blood and in our genetics and in our DNA. But I look back on the first markings on paper of our history, and I can lead it back to Matilda Whittle. She was an awesome woman who was born on the banks of what we know now as the Link River. Back then it was the Yellowowl village site. It's literally maybe just 2 miles from where I live today. And she was born there. And when I think back to her time, she left these really, she stood on these really strong foundations. You know, she was born in a time where culture and religion was everything. It would have driven like how she saw the world, how she moved in her village site, how she connected to other people, how she moved with the seasons, all of these things, because she had this foundational belief, this foundational creation story that told her who she was, why she was, and where she was. And so she had these prescriptions also for leadership that was built in customs and religion. So she had these opportunities to be born into inherent duty, inherent leadership. And there were prescriptions for this that were very organic and cultural. And I love that. She also was an interpreter during the Modoc War. And so she's also, you know, there are stories of her in our history books that talk about, you know, riding her horse for many miles into conflict, right into the Modoc War, into the stronghold, going in and sitting in council with Modoc leaders who were embattled in war. So I look at her and I think she leaves me an amazing legacy. She leaves me this amazing story of a woman who was also moving through a time of intense change during first contact, and how she used her voice and knowledge and connection to try to be part of something greater than herself. And she also had choice. You know, Matilda, she could have chose to not be involved. She could have chose many other things, but she made choices to rise to the occasion, to use her skill set. And so I look at her as really leaving this, really leaving me a model for inherent leadership skills. This would be the great granddaughter of Matilda Whittle. This is my mother's mother, Leitha Chiloquin. I also look at her from the framework of duty. She was a boarding school survivor, and she lived in a time when her tribe, the Klamath tribes, was impacted by termination in the 1950s. So she was a mom during that time with little children at her feet, trying to understand and take in and move through the impacts and effects of a policy like termination. In the 1970s, she moved back to the area, and her husband took a very strong stance in becoming land protectors. They began battling back against the United States government for return of ancestral lands. One thing I love about my grandmother was she was a culture bearer. Everything from making and cooking by the fire to making. She was a teepee maker. I love that about her. So she had a big, huge sewing machine in her living room, and as little kids, you know, we would go in there and she'd be on the pedal machine, you know, sewing these giant teepees in her living room. I love just the few memories I have of my grandmother, like standing at the kitchen sink with her long braids, you know, washing dishes or serving us a meal right off of the wood cook stove. There's just a few memories I have of her. I was only 5 years old when she passed away. But I remember her as being a very fierce woman. I think part of that is because some of my memories were us as little girls sitting in the back of her car, and she drove fast up and over the mountain going down to the ancestral village site, and we'd be bouncing around back there. But I remember my strong little grandma, like her long braids, you know, just bouncing her grandkids over this mountain in her car with no mercy. And so I love those memories that I have, but I always seen her in that driver's seat, just being a strong woman. She had a very strong work ethic. Some of the conversations I've had with our elders, or even her own daughters, like my aunts and my mom, they talk about what a strong worker she was, that she was tirelessly working for her family and her people. She kept an open door policy on her home. And I think that this is one of the most beautiful indigenous qualities of a woman, is really just having a home that's loving and open for folks. So she became the surrogate mom to a lot of Indian children. She took in Indian children often into her home, sometimes kept them for days or sometimes months, and one she kept for a lifetime. So she was also this very surrogate mom and protector of our tribal youth. So she, my grandmother, she leaves this beautiful legacy of just giving it all, you know, like doing your all at all times, giving the best of yourself, working really hard for the people, being a advocate for culture and land and things that matter, and keeping an open door policy in her home, and loving the people that came through her home. So I look at the way that she led and her example of duty and leadership, and I'm really blessed to come from a grandma like her. So that leads to me. And me being 48 years old now, looking back on my life, who I am today, all of my life experiences and my work history and what is my purpose. And I didn't necessarily know that when I came into the field of behavioral health, what my exact purpose was. But what I come to understand is that I carry a significant amount of epigenetic impacts that are tied to, historical hardships that my people have gone through. That plays itself out in different health outcomes, in behavioral health. I also came to understand that I have a really extremely high ACE score, and many people in my family have high ACE scores collectively. And I have a plethora of lived experiences. So when I was born to my late father, Glenn Wilson, a Pitt River tribal member, and my mom, Deanna Wilson, who is a Klamath tribal member. And when I was born, my father had given his life over to the Lord and was fully immersed in all Indian full gospel church. And so for the first 12 to 13 years of my life, our family attended Indian full gospel church. And we lived and breathed that lifestyle per se. My aunt and uncle had built a church, an Indian church here in our own community. My dad helped build that church. And I remember when the foundation was still going up, we would be playing in the ditch banks and things like that right there on site, me and all my cousins. And so I grew up attending lots of camp meetings and revivals throughout Indian country, and really kind of got a front row seat to the spiritual world. I saw a lot during my formative years in that belief system, in that religion, really seeing people come under the spirit of God and speak in tongues and dance until they passed out and be delivered, of hardships that were plaguing them. So I feel like in that time, it really set the foundation for spiritual beliefs, whether I went on to follow those ways or not, but it also set my barometer extremely high for spiritual things, for all spiritual things, because of the types of experiences that I witnessed during that time that really showed me that there is a darkness and a light to this world, that the spiritual realm of this world is very real. So I had those early experiences as a child. I was raised in a home that was also impacted by alcohol and drugs and violence. And our family kind of fluctuated throughout those tough seasons growing up. When I entered the world as a young adult, I like most young people, go out and test my own value system against the world. So I battled with alcohol for a period of about 12 years, and then just woke up one day and said, I'm not going to do this anymore, and walked away from that. I became a widow at the age of 37. I lost my then husband to an episode of alcohol withdrawal. And he lost his life at a very young age. And then I entered the behavioral health field just sort of by accident. I was attending Haskell Indian Nations University. My goal was to be an elementary teacher. And I came home on a summer break, and our tribe was opening a youth residential treatment program. And my brother-in-law was working for the HR department, and he says, you should apply, come work for the summer. And I was like, I don't know. And I went and applied, and they were like, can you start today? And I was like, so that's how I entered the behavioral health field, just like right place, right time, right people kind of situation. And I entered as a treatment aide for the youth residential treatment program, and instantly was just like, these kids are me. I see myself in so many of these kids that are coming in here. And I just fell in love with the field of work. I really fell in love with the field of work. So at that time, I worked my way up to become a substance abuse counselor, and then I was kind of overseeing a lot of the treatment aid work that was going on there. And then I went on to work for the regional partnership grant with our county mental health department. they had a partnership with the Klamath tribes, and they were working for families that were impacted by methamphetamines. And so I did that work for a few years, a lot of skills building in the home, just teaching, basic skill sets to our tribal families, working with parents who were getting their kids returned home soon, working with moms who were really having a difficult time, just kind of rebuilding foundations in their home after, graduating from treatment. So it was just really awesome, powerful work that helped me just stay in the ground level of the community and work with a lot of our tribal members and a lot of families. And then I moved on from there and I became the prevention supervisor. So really focusing on substance abuse prevention, suicide prevention, mental health promotion, and stigma reduction. That was really amazing work. A lot of started doing some work around cultural awareness specific to the Klamath tribe's history, pre and post contact. So that was work that was really focused on health equity and like where we live affects our health. So that was some awesome work. But one of my favorite things about my early career in behavioral health and really building on purpose was I had the honor of working with some of our tribal elders who were kind of lifers in the behavioral health realm. They'd been substance abuse counselors for 20 or more years or had worked in mentoring capacities for behavioral health programs. And I got to share office spaces with them and really be in the presence of them every day. And I love that part of my work experience is just kind of being mentored by some of the best and most fondly remembered providers that our community ever had. During this time in my life, this would be about 14 years ago, one of these elders took me to a ceremony on the banks of Medicine Lake and took me through a water blessing ceremony. And during that moment in time, I hadn't really ever put my feet in the deep end of the cultural ceremonial swimming pool per se. I had gone to a few Native American church meetings and things like that, but I wasn't really fully immersed in the cultural practices of my mom's people. And that would be my first taste of that, is that day at Medicine Lake. And it was so spiritually profound that as we were getting ready to partake in ceremony, it felt like the wind got knocked out of me while I was standing, like ankle deep in Medicine Lake, and was blessed there that day by a pelican. And I remember feeling like my elder had just provided me the space and the time and the place to like literally just peek behind the veil of ancestral knowledge and wisdom. And it was like right there in that moment that I could see and feel that everything that our ancient people, our ancestors, all of this sacred narrative was real. And I felt it just as intensely as a 12-year-old child standing in a prayer line and being prayed over by an ordained minister that was putting his hands on people and prophesizing to them. I felt that same power in that moment, and I thought, wow, and it was life-changing for me in that moment. And so like it was like right then that I started getting very serious about what my purpose was and who I come from and what are the legacies that were left at my feet, and getting a lot more serious about my life. And those same elders were really heavy in their instruction around land connection, that everything about our land is connected to our health. And having lived in a community where, and coming from my mom's people, who was a terminated tribe, and when they regained recognition, were not, their land base was not returned to them per se. And so, land connection was kind of a new concept to me, but was reinforced by these elders and their instructions. So I began going out and seeking land connection. And sometimes it would just be in the form of like getting in my own vehicle and going and wandering out into the mountains or the hills at all hours of the day, a lot of times alone, just sitting quietly out underneath a tree and just building this relationship with our land base. And while I was doing this, I attended the Pit River upriver portion of the Modoc, or the Pit Rivers. They do an ancestral run every year. They've been doing it for, over 30 years. But 15 years ago, they started another leg of the Pit River run that comes through my family's band areas. And so I went down there and I ran in that run. And for the first time, I would be like on foot running through the homelands of my paternal grandparents. And it was so amazing. I remember the feeling was just like, I couldn't believe it. You run like just a group of like 20 of us, all different physical shapes and abilities, could run 200 plus miles in 2.5 days. And I could see right there that there was something about that recipe, about our people like on foot in the nooks and crannies of their homeland, and how just the power of land and body created this dynamic of resiliency. And that was really amazing. And so that kind of was the first ember right then of the spark of the Modoc Ancestral run. So I always like to mention that run, but that whole period of my life was really developing my foundation of purpose. Like, who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I want to carry myself? What do I want to do for my people? How strong of a voice do I want to have? Where is my vision at? How do I build my vision? How do I tend my spirit so that I get vision? All of these kinds of things were happening during that time in my life. I'm really thankful. Always a big honor to think about my ancestors. And so just like that, fast forward 13 years from that period of time, and here comes the American Indian Leadership Academy opportunity. And I remember I got a random email. I don't even know how I got it, but I was reading through the program and I thought, that sounds really awesome. At that time I had taken a different position for the tribe, and I was working more higher level administration. So what I was really good at was the stuff on the ground, working directly with community, building program and being involved in cultural practices and implementing those in behavioral health and seeing those through. That was like where my heart really lived. And I went into this new position, and it was more like administrative. You were overseeing a lot of grant funding and in a lot of executive leadership type of meetings all the time. My former boss used to call it death by meeting. and I could feel myself kind of really starting to drift away from that real strong tether I had to community. And so I thought, well, I'm going to apply for the American Indian Leadership Academy and see what a mentor has to say about this and about this work, and how she might be able to help me. So again, it was another one of those right place, right time, right people. The right people are going to come along in your path like when you need it the most. And so we had our first convening. We went through all kind of these series of 3 interviews with lots of different experts kind of in the field, subject matter experts. And then the selection was made of who we as mentees would be aligned with. And so all praise to Nelda Husky. She is a Navajo woman, has worked for many years in the behavioral health field, but she became my mentor during this time. And one thing that really stands out to me about Nelda is her presence. And she was a very steady spirited woman. That's one thing that I noticed about her from the very beginning. Like our very first conversation we had, was that she was just level, like in her spirit, and a very solid woman, a very culturally connected woman. And I thought, she's going to be good for me. She's going to be very good for me because a lot of things and a lot of dynamics were kind of spinning, and like the workload was extremely heavy, and I was really missing the community-based stuff. So I thought, okay, Nelda's going to be it for me. And so I really attribute that right time, right place, right people in this American Indian Leadership Academy experience, because I feel like even her placement was by the creator's design because of what she began to bring to me during this process. So I really appreciate her. Another thing about the American Indian Leadership Academy project was we were to have a very specific project that we were going to work on over the course of 1 year. We had to be really clear about what our project was up front. We were learning a lot of tools around just leadership in general, like leadership from kind of like a executive tribal administrator kind of level. We did a lot of surveys and such to really tell us about what our leadership style was and those kinds of things. So we were doing a lot of that work and trying to really create a strategic pathway for the project that we were going to be working on. So Nelda and I, we were putting our minds together in the very beginning, just trying to understand some of the tools and understand what my leadership deficits or qualities were to gear up for the project that we had in mind, or I had in mind. A couple of things that led into my initial vision for the first project was the fact that I was working for a behavioral health program that was generally about 80% tribal members from the community that we were serving. The tribes also built this really beautiful resolution to really speak to tribal preference and hiring practices. And so we were, there was a lot of work being done to really bring tribal members who have lived in their community all of their lives into a lot of positions within the health system. And so with that, I could see where there was room for growth, that we were bringing a lot of folks in, but there maybe wasn't necessarily all the supports there to keep them in the system and help them as they navigated through their roles. And so the initial project that I had in mind for this, and this was really based on a lot of conversations in leadership meetings with my own supervisor, with our tribal chairman and other leaders, is, how do we maintain a workforce? How do we support a workforce? What would this look like if we indigenized it? Those kinds of things. So my initial project was really big. It was, it's 100 miles up into the air, but I had this really beautiful vision to indigenize human resources. And it would entail like taking on a whole brand new approach to the way that we are onboarding our tribal folks, the folks who will live in this community for the rest of their lives. How do we develop a program that's really modeling health? So our outward facing selves as helpers and healers in our community is well, that our people are getting the kind of support that they need to be good helpers and healers. And helpers and being helpers while they're healing. Because a lot of people come into the field because they want to do heart work, but maybe haven't done their own healing. And that could create a lot of challenges down the road. So this idea was to really indigenize our policies and procedures, to build a different kind of design for human resources and the way that we manage conflict in the workplace. So instead of like performance plans, maybe folks are getting a treatment plan, and they're working on some of the underlying issues that may be driving conflict in the work, or if their home life is extremely stressful and they're packing all of this stress on their shoulders into the workplace. How can wellness plans help them to really kind of unpack a lot of that stuff, to get helped while they're on the job, you know, to carve out time that they can really dedicate to their healing as an employee. So it was a really big vision. It was a really big vision. And there was a lot of minds that would have to be swayed. There were some leaders that were already like, love the idea of it and were behind it. What we would be addressing through this project was the lateral violence that oftentimes plays out in our programming. It would eliminate that kind of 3 strikes, you're out, like 3 write-ups and you're out of here. It would drive down like recidivism of the same kind of issues happening over and over again. And it would really just give honor to the actual reality of having to walk in both worlds. So meaning that you walk in both worlds, like you're a community member, but you're also in, you know, after 5 p.m., but 8 to 5, you're in this helper and healer role. And that sometimes is a really difficult sword edge to be walking as a tribal person, because it comes with a lot of extra additional stress. Oftentimes as tribal employees working for our own systems, we're not excluded or automatically protected from the same risk factors of the people that we are serving. And so my initial project and the idea was, let's create an entire employee support program that's just different than anything we've ever seen before, so that the folks who are in these helping and healer roles get the support that they need to become better helpers and healers. And so that was really big vision, really high level. And we started working towards the initial phases of drafting out what would the strategic plan look like for that, what conversations would we need to have first, who are all the players that would need to be involved in this project, where does it even begin? And so we were in the very initial phases of working that stuff out. And then, as all of you know, COVID apocalypse happens. It feels like it just literally happened overnight. So like many other tribal programs across Indian country, like almost overnight, all systems like were on hold until groups could be formed and leaders can start to figure out, how do we even begin, one, protecting the people, responding to this epidemic, you know, ensuring that our work continues on, but how does that look? And so COVID just really kind of was the meteor that exploded everything that we were working towards. Even for the Leadership Academy, I remember some of our first sessions were like, okay, guys, what is this going to look like going forward? This project is a year. We're obviously impacted by COVID. People's, you know, some of my mentors' projects also began to be impacted because on the list of priorities for leadership to be looking at, COVID was at the very top, you know, like completely indigenizing our human resources department. And that work was way at the bottom. Like, we have all these other things we have to be looking at right now. Also, at the time, our behavioral health program went to remote work. A lot of us had to follow isolation measures for quite some time. And then right in the midst of the COVID apocalypse, we also had a high-level leadership change in our health system, and then had to put together kind of this interim 3-man approach for leadership during the COVID period. So this really left me as a Leadership Academy mentee taking a look at what could I do then? What could I be focused on instead of pouring a lot of my time into this vision around indigenizing our human resources? How can I turn that vision somewhere else? And this is what I love about my mentor, Nelda, is Nelda was often behind the scenes, giving me a lot of encouragement around grounding and spirit and land connection. She would mention these things kind of often to me, and so I started thinking about the stuff she was sharing. Sometimes she would we would connect and I'd just be frazzled of like, everything's so crazy right now. And, there's all these things to figure out. And she would bring in this very grounded presence. And so I really love that about her style. So following COVID apocalypse, or during COVID apocalypse, started looking at, okay, turning my sights back onto the Modoc Ancestral run. And there were some initial thoughts in the very beginning of this run. Well, in the beginning phases of the COVID apocalypse, that were we even going to be able to have the Modoc run? And I had never been challenged with that thought before, because I just figured in the very beginning of this run, it was a vision given by the creator. And so with that, I had to put full trust in that this would go on. And I, even on the flyers every year, this run happens in October, I put literally on the flyers, this run will happen whether rain, sleet, hail, or snow. Like, we will go through with this no matter what we are faced with. But here we were, in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and there was a lot of isolation orders in place. And what would this look like? It is something that happens completely outdoors. So I was challenged a little bit with, what do I do with this ceremony? What do I do with this vision that was given? And do I halt this? Do I continue on with it? What would my ancestors do? Like, all of these thoughts came into play. And the reason is because this was a vision-led and is a vision-led ceremony. So this means that every year I'm thinking about, what will this run do for the people this year? Even the route that we're going to travel every year is laced with a lot of prayers. It's laced with a lot of going out onto the land and just sitting in deep thought about what route should we go this year, and looking for guidance, looking for that ancestral guidance, and most importantly, signs. Most importantly, keeping an eye out for signs. The vision around the Modoc Ancestral Run is really three-pronged and really built and designed by the creator's will to do three very distinct things. Number one, it's to create a new narrative in places where pain has occurred. So if anybody on here is familiar with the Modoc people and the things that the Modoc people faced from first contact on, in the landscape of the Modoc ancestors, there is a lot of pain across the landscape, where massacres happened, where forced removal happened, where war happened, all of these things. And so the vision here around this run is to go out and put our feet on this landscape, to sing our songs on our landscape, to say prayers in our own language, to get Modoc descendants back onto their country, into their territory, and start creating new narratives in places where pain occurred. The second, of course, is land connection. So how do we start building a very personal relationship with our landscape? How do we go back to sacred sites and reintroduce ourselves and connect to them? Because those sacred sites are no longer, it's not like they lose their sacredness. They were created by Kamush. They were created by Silver Fox and Coyote. They told us about why we are and where we are. And so it's not like these sites have lost the ability to grant us the things we need to take care of ourselves. It's our job to go back and reconnect with them. And so this run was also a lot about land connection. And then, of course, just organically out of those two things, we would build resilience factors in our people. And so the calling would go out, around mid-September of like, okay, the Modoc run, everything's in place. We've been receiving all of the signs. We've gotten this spiritual guidance. We've gotten our ancestral connection is strong, and we're really feeling the nudge to run in this area, to run to these places. So this is a very big deal, taking on and actualizing a vision and taking care of it and tending to it is a very big deal. It's a very serious matter in the way that I saw it. So the COVID pandemic really created a lot of challenges during this time of, do we halt this? Do we stop this run? And so I appreciate Nelda's beautiful spiritual based nudges as my mentor. It's just to always remember the sacred, always remember what's really important, like on the foundational ground level. I really appreciate that. So we were facing 2020, and you know, prior to what you're seeing here on the screen, and I think Chris Turner, one of my colleagues, is on, and I thought if Chris joins this, he's going to be really proud of of this picture here, because often when we work together, he would make these really awesome photos and have stories behind them. But what you're looking at here is the grave sites of Modoc leaders who were hung at Fort Klamath. And Fort Klamath from Klamath Falls is about probably 25, 30 miles up the road from where I live. So a few years prior to 2020, new headstones were placed on these grave sites. And we brought some really large obsidian rocks from the Glass Mountain lava flow, which is in the heart of Modoc country. And we placed those obsidian rocks at the foot of these headstones just to symbolize their connection since the beginning of time. These rocks are as old as the landscape. And so even back then, I was already thinking about this particular site. And again, under the spiritual love and guidance of one of our Modoc elders, we went to the headstone ceremony. And we kind of hung around in the back row, you know, just kind of checking out how the ceremony kind of unfolded. And once the crowd kind of started dispersing, we went over and we sat in the old jail cell. And it's not the exact jail cell where the Modoc leaders would have been placed from July to October, but it was a replica. And we went and sat inside there. There's about 5 of us, and we sang song after song until we couldn't really think of any more songs to sing. And the wind was blowing really hard, and it was coming through the boards of the jailhouse, and the metal was kind of creaking in there, and just the atmosphere was really telling of what their experience would have been like in that room. And so we sat in there long enough that when we came out, everybody was gone, and all the chairs were already put away, and like there wasn't a car in sight. And our elder, she said, go ask the worker over there where the gallows were. And so I said, okay. So I walk over there, and he says, they're over there across the fence, kind of where that horse corral is, right there, where that horse is at. So I came back, and we went over there, and she said, walk me over as far as we can get, and I want to say this prayer in the Modoc language. And so we walked over there, and she got out this piece of paper, and her husband had passed on, and it was a prayer that he wrote in the Modoc language. And so she started to read this prayer, and this horse like threw his head up, and he starts looking around, and she's reading through the sentences, and he starts to gallop like around the corral really slowly. And as she talks, he starts going like faster and faster. Pretty soon she's getting towards the end of the prayer, and he's running at like a full gallop. And when she stops praying, he stops, the horse stops, and he's like throwing his head around and like pawing at the ground. And we just looked at each other. Like, why? There was a spiritual move happening right there. And so that clicked like in my mind about what about one of our behavioral health experts, and also a Klamath tribal member, talked about was like the DNA of even our animal relatives and the trees. You know, they have their own genetic memory of our language, of our songs, of our melodies, of our tones, like all these things. And so I was watching it like play out in full scope. And then shortly after that, we went out to the same site, and they had us a meteor shower event going on with these large telescopes. And we went out there, and there's too many people to kind of stand in line for the telescope. So So we went out and we laid blankets out on the grass near these headstones, and we just watched the meteor shower, like in the old way, you know, just with our eyes. And we were almost, the event had already cleared out. Again, it was one of those situations where you just get so immersed in the moment that you don't really like pay attention to what's happening around you. But by the time we like got up and started folding up the blankets and stuff, everyone was gone. Like all the telescopes were gone, all the cars had pulled out. And the groundskeeper came around and was like flashing his light, and he said, "Are you guys gonna stay the night here?" With "No, we're gonna head out." And he said, "Well, I'm getting ready to lock the gate." And so my friend says, "Sing the Modoc Ancestral run before we leave." And I said, "Okay." And so I just belted out this song, and it was quiet. It was so quiet out there. And the moment like the last word was sung, like it sounded like 100 coyotes started howling. And we were just awestruck by it. And then I thought, okay, we're gonna run from here. These are all the signs I need. I have the sign of the horse, and I have the sign of these coyotes tonight, and this is where we're gonna run from here in 2020. And so I made the decision during the midst of COVID pandemic to continue this run. And it was a risk, you know, it was a risk of, would runners come? You know, would they be you know, fearful of COVID? You know, do we do masks? Like, what do we do? You know, can we stay 6 feet apart? You know, we have to hand off the staff, the run staff, you know, like all these things. And we can say that there's all these rules in the beginning, but everybody's going to want to ride in the back of the truck and be less than 6 feet by each other, you know. So there is just a lot of prayer that went into to the run this year and what we would do. And so we decided, you know, like let's just go with it. You know, we're getting these signs, you know, we're gonna take those seriously, and we're gonna just go on with it. And so another thing was happening during this time in 2020. We were also that year in another drought year. And so the water crisis in our community is always really elevated, and kind of with these heavy tones of racism between the ag community and our tribal community. And this year we had an ally who went to the Board of Commissioners and had them deem Modoc as the week of the Modoc Ancestral Run as Modoc Ancestral Run Week. And so for the first time ever in the lifespan of the Modoc Ancestral Run, I was standing in halls of power in this county that are oftentimes what I would call like pro-ag community. And they were speaking about the Modoc Ancestral Run and making these statements about resilience and healing in time immemorial. And they were literally reading these words into record. And I thought, wow, that's really powerful. And so we held the Modoc Ancestral Run in 2020. And we ended this run. We ended this run inside of Captain Jack's cave. And so we packed out this cave. There was probably about 50 of us down in here, you know, doing our closing thoughts, doing our closing songs and our prayers. And everybody had a chance to share how they were moved in their core during this run. You know, what did they see? What did they feel? What did they hear? And it was a really beautiful time, but it was you could just feel that it was transformational. And so there was another sign that that we faced these fears of pandemic, that we paid attention to the signs that we were getting from the spiritual world, that, you know, our elders talked this prayer into existence, and it caused these ripple effects that caused this force to stand at attention and respond in the song with the coyotes and all these things. So we made it through 2020, and we held a really awesome spiritual run that year that was just laced with nothing but like ancestral strength and resilience. And so I love that we were able to move ourselves through that. And I can still, like when I'm talking right now, I can remember some of the solid words that were spoken in this cave. You know, this was a cave where one of our Modoc leaders lived during the Modoc War. And we travel all through that Modoc War site until we get to this cave, and then we'll climb down in there. We've done this several times, but this time it was just extremely different and moving for us, because we had just ran from Fort Klamath, you know, where our leaders were hung. And so this was a very special run time for us. And then 2021, just prior to the Modoc Ancestral run in 2021, we would convene in San Diego, where we would have the American Indian Leadership Academy graduation ceremony with all of the mentees and the mentors. And so I talked a little bit about the Modoc Ancestral run for 2020 and my kind of final project deliverables, and really looking at leadership from this indigenous and spiritual led, you know, vision driven kind of perspective. And because we don't get to talk about this a lot in administrative leadership, we don't talk enough as tribal people, I think, about the spiritual lens of leadership, the cultural framework around leadership. And this program, this American Indian Alaska Native Leadership Academy, allowed for that. And so I really love that. And so we were then on the heels of the next Modoc Ancestral run. And during this time, we also were doing another behavioral health project called Restoration of the Spirit, and had really revitalized like 5 ancient stories about the wanderings of our ancient beings and the lessons that we derive from their movements across the landscape. So, you know, like stories like Coyote mourns his wife, and even in 2021, how is that story relevant to today? You know, the butterfly family, you know, Raven turns the butterflies to stone is another story about lateral oppression and grief and depression. And it's very relevant in this day and age. And so, you know, we were doing a lot of work around also building a documentary about the ancient stories that are carved in stone in the Modoc and Klamath landscape. And what do these rock carvings mean? And what does this tell us about the health of our people from this really ancient perspective? And over again, the belief about everything about our health is tied to the landscape. Like they're even though Modocs were removed from their territory entirely, everything about becoming healthy again is tied to this landscape, all of the sacred sites, everything. And so there can't be one without the other. So we were, in our behavioral health work, we were doing a lot of focus around those really deep roots of cultural knowledge. And so this year's run was going to be transformational in a lot of ways, because while out on the landscape, again, tending to the original vision from 2008, it was a lot of talk, a lot of prayer, a lot of being on land to decide to make a very unique journey this year. And it was also backdropped by the fact that we had lost our Modoc elder, the woman who spoke the prayer at Fort Klamath. We also lost her. And so this year's run was really about memorializing all of her knowledge that she gave us. You know, she was such a matriarch of the Modoc run. You know, from year 2, she was there every year. I remember she ran like just days out of heart surgery. She would power through her dialysis and make it down on the run and run all day long. You know, she was another example of like indigenous leadership, by the way she carried herself, by the love of her people, by the love of land connection, all of these things, the way she tended to each other, you know, all the people on the run with her hugs and her strong words and her prayers and all of that. She was amazing. So we wanted to really also just show her as now our ancestor that we were listening, that we were taking her instructions and her lifetime serious about land. And so we decided this year that we were going to do this very special run route, and we were going to do two really powerful things. We were going to sleep up on top of the peninsula, and the peninsula in our ancient narratives is the first land base made that Kamush, the Modoc creator, made when he was forming the world of the Modoc people. We were going to sleep up there on top of that. And the second, that we were all going to go down into Fern Cave, and we were going to sing a set of 5 songs. And so these two things within hours of each other were creating kind of this transformational shift in our narrative about who we are and why we are, really staking our claim in our own healing and resilience. And so the time came around in October, and this is a picture of the peninsula here. It's a really sharp rock edge piece of land that just kind of cuts right into the sky. And we ran for a full day to this site here, to the peninsula. And then there was a handful of us that made our way to the top here and set up our tents, and we were camping there for the night. And when the morning starts on the Modoc Ancestral run, we started inside the Lava Beds National Park, and we're all circled up and we're waiting for the sunrise to come up and for the sun to just make its first peak over the landscape, where it shoots like the sun rays down onto the valley. And that's when we send our first runner out of the camp with the run staff, and then we all start a relay style run. The night before, a lot of people come to the camp and they camp the night before, and we'll often like sit around campfire and sing songs and just talk about the morning and just share love and laughter with each other. And we have a fire that burns throughout the Modoc Ancestral run, and we usually light that fire like in a prominent place somewhere that kind of overlooks the landscape. And at the instruction of our elders, she would tell me, like, when you go and light the fire, sing a song when you're lighting the fire, and think about what you want for the run, or maybe you're looking for a sign or something. And so I said, okay. And so that night before the run, I went down by myself and I put the fire together and lit the fire, and I sang a pelican song, and I made this song specifically to remember that moment at Medicine Lake when I was in that water blessing ceremony, and I was touched by the pelican. And I sang that while I was down there lighting the fire. And nobody was there with me. I was just there by myself. And so the next morning, the fire is still burning. We're heaping a bunch of wood on it, and we're all circled up, and we're putting medicine on ourselves, and we're getting ready for the run to send the first runner out. And we got about halfway to the peninsula, and we had ran on Highway 39 for a little bit, and we turned off, headed towards Clear Lake. And I was stopped right there on the corner. There was probably about 6 of us just kind of around the bed of a truck talking, waiting for the run staff. And this flock of pelicans come. It's probably like 50 pelicans. And they're just flying like around and around above us, and so it was just one of those times, like, right place, right people. This is exactly where each of us is supposed to be in this moment. And there was no denying it, like in that moment, so we got to the peninsula. The sun was starting to go down. Those of us who were going to camp, we made our way to the top, and I always say it was like Everest mountain level type of wind gusts. The wind wouldn't even keep the tents up. Like, we had to like jam our hiking poles into the ground to like hold the tent walls up and things like that. But I remember there was mountain lion tracks like everywhere up there, and the mountain lion, he was a figure in a lot of our ancient narratives. And so we didn't mind that. We knew that we were, for the first time in probably over 150 years, we were sleeping on that peninsula. You know, we were like in the spiritual center in that place. And around 2 o'clock in the morning, like the winds just ceased altogether, and it was so quiet. And we woke up in the morning before the sun came up, and we broke down our tents, and we all stood on the edge of the peninsula, and we watched the sun start to come up, and we sang songs right there in that moment. And we descended off of the hill, and we came down to the bottom, and all the runners were there waiting for us. And it was just powerful. And we ran from there to Fern Cave, and another power place, another very sacred place. And we all descended under the earth's surface, and we went down in there, and we connected like in one accord. And we put out 5 songs there that day, and we climbed back out of the earth, and we finished our run for that day. And so it was, again, you know, just taking that very, very intentional prayer, looking for the signs and actualizing that as the signs come. You know, that I think that is a big part of Indigenous leadership values and important elements that even our ancestors talked about. And so this is a picture of the sun starting to come up, and our run staff's there. You know, we put those out overnight to sit there, and so that those first beams of sun coming up for the day tell us that it's time to get started on our journey. Another picture here of us descending off of the peninsula, coming down to the bottom. Just, you can't see them, they're out of sight here, but just down below is a big circle of runners that are waiting for us to come down off of this ledge. And so, you know, we come into 2022, and started thinking about the Treaty of 1864, you know, and what was the Treaty of 1864, and what did that mean to the Modoc people? And so now it's even more thought about, even more intentionality about where we're running from, and what does this mean, and what is it that we're trying to transcend, and what is it that we're attempting to heal, and what is the narrative that we want our people to have going forward, not to go to these places and only feel pain, but to have a new narrative around these sites. And so one of the places we thought about was Council Grove. This is where the Treaty of 1864 was signed with the Klamath, Modoc, and Yellowowl people. And Modocs would come to this signing of this treaty, really learning that they're losing their land base altogether, that no lands in their territory would be considered, and they would be forced to leave their land entirely and come to the Klamath Reservation. So we went out there prior to the run looking for a sign, and it was all of our first time. There's 4 of us that went out there, and when we got there, it was kind of snowing across the valley, and it was really cold, and we kind of just separated and walked around the Council Grove area. During the treaty negotiations, there would be over 1,000 Klamath, Modoc, and Yellowowl people camped in this area for treaty negotiations. And I went and I stood at the edge of this pine tree stand, and I was just looking across the valley, watching the snowfall, and I felt a lot of pain in that place. Like you could feel it, like in the ground. It was like, it was real heavy. And so we spent about, you know, half an hour kind of off in our own corners, and we came back and gathered up around the council tree. There's an old growth tree there that's cut off where this marker is. And my colleague said we should sing some songs. And I was like, okay. And so my colleague, he started singing a song in the Modoc language, and right above us, probably about 30 feet, this red-tailed hawk came in, and he caught like the right wind gust that he was just floating in the air. Like he wasn't moving at all. He was just steady, like in one spot the whole time he was singing this song. And I thought to myself in that moment, okay, there's the sign. There's the sign that we need to come here and run from this place. And it wasn't long after that, I did a cultural awareness training for one of the most interesting groups. It was for the Klamath Basin Water Users Association, which is all agricultural leadership in the Klamath Basin. And one of the ladies there, after the presentation, she came up and said, I own the property where Council Grove is, and I want your people to have access to it, you know, come out and see it. And I said, hey, could we build a sweat there on the banks of that river? There probably hasn't been a sweat there in over 150 years. And can we camp on your property and run from there? And she said, yes. And so we did. We went out, built a sweat lodge on the banks of that river, sweat the night before the run, slept at Council Grove, and we ran home from there. And not only did we run from there, it would be the first year that we would sleep on Modoc owned land. And it would also be the same land that was the same route that my 6th great grandmother, Matilda, would have traveled on horseback going to the Modoc war site as an interpreter. And so all of these things like coming full circle, you know, just being very diligent in tending to this ancestral run and making sure that you follow like that sacred protocol when you're looking for answers for these things. And so we had the 2022 Modoc Ancestral Run, and we came out of Council Grove and we ran along Agency Lake and Klamath Lake. We put the run staffs on a boat and sent them across Klamath Lake. We ran to the Modoc Ranch, which is owned by the Modoc tribe of Oklahoma. They own a large piece of property down there near the lava beds, and we ran to that property and we stayed the night on Modoc territory, on Modoc land owned by Modoc people. We had an amazing meal prepared by their staff from buffalo raised by Modoc people. And we greeted the sun from this site, and we put our songs into the air, and then we took off and we were headed for Medicine Lake. And it was just a beautiful thing. I love this picture centered here. This is a mom, and she brought her little baby who was, I don't even think she was a year old yet here, but I love this picture, how she just clasped onto the run staff while her mom was carrying her and running. It's like these kinds of things are, the opportunities are there for our people to connect in this way, to put their footprint down in their own homeland, to travel through, you know, backcountry and nooks and crannies of their homeland that they've never seen before in their whole life, to sit out there on an ancient stone and in silence and wait for the run staff on their own, just by themselves, with their own thoughts, their own prayers, all those kinds of things. It's beautiful. And then we ended here at Medicine Lake. This is the site that I talked about early on, about where my elder and one of my mentors took me for my first ceremony, where the pelican touchdown, where kind of like my purpose began, as we ended the run here at this site. Later, I would learn that this is another spiritual center of our people. And this lake has a lot of healing properties. It's a place where both Pit River and Modoc people would come to dive in, to take care of themselves, to heal their spirits for a lot of different reasons. And so this is where we ran to in 2022. And so when we think about, you know, inherent leadership, that duty-driven leadership, and that purposeful leadership, you know, a lot of credit goes out to our ancestors that really laid the foundation for this, that also had their ears and their eyes and their spirits attuned to when the Creator gave them a vision, when the Creator said, this is the way you do it. They followed that instruction, and it provided all of these fruits for the people. Now, if our ancestors didn't listen and heed the calling, if their spirits weren't centered enough to receive those visions and actualize them, where would we be? I think about that a lot. So we have this really deep tethered to inherent leadership, duty-driven leadership that develops this really strong purpose, and we have the choice. I give a lot of credit to my own mom and dad, my own mom and dad for being children of boarding school survivors to, really just try to navigate children for the first time in their lives, having their own unhealed trauma. They loved us to the best of their ability. They really advised us and set up our lives at a young age to be hardworking people, to have good, solid work ethic. I love that. I give a lot of credit to the American Indian Alaska Native Leadership Academy, who created a program for indigenous folks to come together in these fields of work and elevate their leadership capacities. I think about my academy peers. A lot of them were listed in one of the early slides. In the projects that they were working on in their own communities. But when we all got together, like in these different cities, and we would have our convenings, they all had love for their community. They were all doing exceptional hard work in their community and all highly committed to the field of work. So I really love that. And then of course, Nelda, my mentor, she's just an amazing woman, and we still check in from time to time, but she always brought that really solid reminder of like, remember the spiritual nature of things, remember your own spirit. She is always telling me that, because sometimes the calls would be really frantic, like we have so much going on in the community, or we've just had unprecedented amounts of loss and it's really hard, and like I'm drowning in work, and like all these kind of things, she would always bring in and be that really beautiful reminder of grounding. And so I give a lot of credit to her, and she's an example of all these things: inherent duty and purpose. So to my colleagues and my peers at the American Indian Leadership Institute, this is me and Nelda here, centered down in the front, just amazing individuals. There's just a collection of hundreds and hundreds of years of wisdom just in this little group right here. A lot of subject matter experts in this picture here. And so with that, I want to just go ahead and close. I want to say thank you for staying on this call today and being with me through this storytelling experience. I like to kind of deliver things through a storytelling perspective, and really just talking about some of the important vantage points of indigenous-based leadership, vision-led, spirit-led leadership, and the deep roots of that, and how it transforms individuals, or can transform even your own community, how it can really touch the hearts of your people in the way that they might need it. And it's not us doing it. Like I'm not a healer that goes out and puts my hands on somebody and heals them, but healers are also people who create opportunity. They create the opportunity for their people to go out and connect in those really deep ways. So at this point, thank you for attending. Thank you for listening. I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to our folks.
Thank you so much, Monica. That was a really beautiful presentation. Thank you for sharing your story with us. So now we have a short time for comments or questions. Feel free to add those to our chat box. You can also use the Zoom feature to raise your hand, and we can answer them that way. So I will give you all a moment. If you have any questions, we would love to hear them.
Hi, Monica. Just want to echo what Sarah was saying. I loved hearing your presentation and like the history that you had of like your grandmother and all of like the memories and the fond times that you guys had shared during your early childhood. I thought that was especially touching. I was just curious with like your time throughout the Leadership Academy, what would you say was like the most rewarding part for you, or like a special moment that stuck out for you?
I would say it would probably be, I really loved our first convening. That's where we were all like raw, we were unsure, like we all flew across the country to it was it Sac and Fox? The Sac and Fox tribe, I think is where we went. And I remember their community invited us to come to their gymnasium and have a meal. And we were in their territory, and so it was just optional. Like some people wanted to go off and kind of ventures. A couple people were going to go on a long distance run, like those kind of things. But there was a group of us that was like, let's go over to the gym and hang out. They was going to make us fry bread and like all kinds of stuff. And so we went over there and hung out with women from the community. And one of the women, she got up and she spoke, and she said, our first contact was in 1666. And it's estimated that at the time of contact, there were 30,000 of us. And just like 10 years later, there were 3,000. And I thought that was so powerful to hear that. And so it just elevated for me. Like I thought to myself, wow, our first contact wasn't until 1826. Like 160 years later. And their community was dealing with the same challenges our community was dealing with. And I thought, you've had 160-year jump on us in a way. And look at our communities. And it really, for me, drove home how deeply the roots and impacts are of colonization, and the impacts and effects truly of historical trauma. But here these women were in their gymnasium laughing and cooking food and loving visitors that came, to their territory. And their gymnasium had all these really beautiful paintings around the room that had their indigenous language that told about their values and these kinds of things. So I feel like that was one of my favorite moments, one of my favorite moments, and in the whole thing. And then also just the presentations of all of my peers at the end, when we convened in San Diego and we're wrapping up our projects, just to hear how brilliant all the peers were to really create visions and actualize them is amazing. So those, I have two, but going to Sac and Fox is one of my favorites.
Yeah, that sounds really powerful, Monica. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Monica, it looks like several people are interested in connecting with you. So if there is a way they can connect with you, maybe you could put that in the chat.
Yes, I can add that in the chat. Don't hold me accountable for still using Hotmail. But I'm going to put my personal email here in the chat. Feel free to get a hold of me if you want, and we can meet up or chat online or anything like that. Also, if you want to go to Facebook, the Modoc Ancestral Run has a Facebook page where you can see years and years of pictures. Oftentimes I'll just start sharing, what I'm going out and searching for the new run route for the year and what that entails. After this call, that's where I'm actually headed to, is a new corner of the territory that I haven't been to yet. So I'll be heading out there today, but you're welcome to contact me. I would love to chat. I love to just talk about this kind of stuff and put minds together and really think about how we serve our people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today and for sharing all of this. It has really been wonderful. And thank you for everyone attending. If you could, please take a few moments to give us feedback on the event. You can utilize the QR code that Taylor has been posting in the chat, or the QR code on the screen, or the link that Taylor has been posting in the chat. You will also receive a follow-up email with a link to the session's recording. Within that email, you will also receive instructions on how to receive a certificate attendance. So thank you again for joining us today. It was lovely to have you all here.
Thank you, everyone.